The Turkic people over the last 2500 years spit out some of the largest and mightiest empires in world history. When thinking about them, of course, immediately the Ottoman Empire comes to mind. And 2 centuries before the rise of the Ottomans, the Seljuk Empire was the king of the hill. But the further back in time we go, the more Turkic empires become obscure, a bit alien even. That is because the Turkic people in the aforementioned time period wandered thousands of miles away from their original homeland between modern-day Kazakhstan and Korea, including of course Mongolia. And that's the reason why their empires were situated in different parts of the world, from the border to Korea all the way to Egypt, from the gates to Persia to northern China, and from the steppe region of Ukraine to India. But out of all these many empires and states, the most impressive, in my humble opinion at least, was that of the Göktürks, both in terms of territory as well as political might. Never heard of them? No wonder. That's because these steppe warriors were and are hardly part of any school curriculum, history book or documentary on TV in any part of the world. Even in Turkey, which sees itself as the heir to all of these empires too, the Göktürks are barely a topic of discussion. Unjustly so. Why? Well, look at it.
Look at it! Look at it! Look at it!
Seriously, it's ginormous. Even in comparison to the large sublime state of the Ottoman dynasty, the Göktürks ruled over much more land. Over nearly 8 million square kilometers to be exact. You probably know that the rise of the Ottomans was one that took quite a long time, and that Ertuğrul and his son Osman, and his sons for that matter, worked very hard to establish a principality that would need decades to become a regional power. It's a great story of the underdog overcoming the odds. With the Göktürks, the story is a bit different. They were underdogs too, though. This is the territory controlled by the Ashina tribe before they established the empire in 546. Then, their territory after establishing the Khaganate in 552. And again in 560 after subjugating the Kyrgyz and Mongols. And again in 580 during the siege of Kerch on the Crimea. Within just 3 decades, the Göktürks had created the largest empire to ever exist up to that point, one that was even larger than the Roman and Persian empires.
Impressive.
And this does not yet include the expansion into the Caucasian area during the war between Byzantium and Persia.
Most impressive.
But how in the world did they manage to do that? And who are these crazy Göktürks anyway? Let's take a look. The history of the Göktürks is as ominous as it is peculiar. As you can guess, these Turkic people resided not in Anatolia, but not even in Turkestan, the region with the many stans in it, but in and around the Altai Mountains. The story goes that many eons ago, a village near Gaochang was once attacked by an invading Chinese army. All the inhabitants were slaughtered, except for a small boy who was able to escape. Due to his wounds, he didn't come very far. But suddenly, a she-wolf with bluish fur appeared. When the Chinese commander heard of the survivor, he ordered his troops to find the boy and execute him. The she-wolf, however, took the boy with her and fled to a mountainous area further north. They arrived at the Altai. Here, she nurtured him and the boy's wounds were healed. After he grew up, he merged with the wolf and she gave birth to 10 children.
I don't like where this is going.
Yeah, they merged.
Please, lady, you don't understand. You don't know what you're doing here.
And she became pregnant. I know what you're all thinking right now, but let's just accept this part of the story, never talk about it again, and just get on. In any case, the 10 boys also grew up to become 10 strong men. After forging a hammer that could melt the mountains, they made an exit and intermingled with the surrounding population, taking wives from other families. This new family grew in numbers. In honor of their mother, they bore the surname Ashina. In original Turkic, her name was Ashina, but Ashina is how the Chinese pronounce it. This legend is the birth of the Turk. Not of all Turkic peoples in general, but of those who called themselves Turk at that time. For whatever reason, the Ashina not even once referred to themselves as Ashina, but as Turk, for all we know that is. This term quickly became an ethnonym because after they created the Göktürk Empire, they managed to unite all Turkic tribes, clans and federations under one banner. For the first time, and the last time. The Ashina were as Turkic-speaking as the Kyrgyz, Uyghur, Bulgars, Oghuz and other Turkic peoples, but it is only after the Göktürks that the Turkic people actually started calling themselves Turk, just to clear that up. This legend of Ashina is supposed to be the founding myth of the Göktürk Empire and in part does explain the flight of the Türk Ashina families from Gaochang to the Altai region probably between 436 and 439. But once they arrived, they were subjugated by the mighty Rouran Khaganate, which was reigning supreme over the Eurasian steppe at that time. It would take another century for the Ashina to be able to break free from Rouran rule. And this is where our badass of the century comes in, Bumin. Around 542, an army of nomadic warriors arrived at the Wei River in northern China. There, they decided to strike several Chinese villages along the nomadic sedentary frontier. Thanks to a ruse by Yuwen, a governor of the Taizu dynasty, the attackers had to retreat.
Oh no!
But it is here where for the first time ever, a people called Turks are listed in world history. It's likely that the leader of these Turks was in fact Bumin, a 5th-generation descendant of Ashina and high chief of the Ashina tribe. But just 4 years later, the Turks again got everyone's attention, as the Tile, a federation of Turkic tribes, were preparing an attack on their overlord Anagoy of the Rouran Khaganate. Bumin mobilized his troops and prevented the revolt.
I'm gonna do what's called a pro-gamer move.
Instead, Bumin's Ashina Turks directly attacked the Tile and apparently defeated the 50,000 warrior-strong army in one swift strike. Bumin then became de facto leader of the Tile, having subjugated them. As a reward for saving both the Tiles and Ashina's common overlord from a coup, Bumin requested something special from his liege Anagoy, the hand of one of his daughters. Anagoy declined, insulted Bumin as his blacksmith slave, and Bumin had the emissary killed that brought him this message. For the next 5 years, Bumin cut off all relations with the Rouran and began a rebellion of his own. Then, he defeated the Rouran armies twice in battle, in February and April of 552 respectively. The defeat must have been so humiliating that Anagoy committed suicide and his family fled to China. Some of the Rouran nobility fled westwards, however, and probably merged with the so-called Avars in Eastern Europe. In any case, Bumin decided to claim the throne of Khagan by himself. He installed the Ashina family as the ruling dynasty, which meant that the Ashina Turks controlled the army, bureaucracy, and decided upon economic policy decisions. Under mysterious circumstances, though, Bumin died in the same year and his son and successor Kara just a year later. But under leadership of Bumin's brother Istemi in the west and Bumin's second eldest son Mukan in the east, the Göktürks, in an era of political stability, were able to expand their influence across all of the Eurasian steppe belt. For example, they managed to attack the Korean Goguryeo kingdom in 552 already, a year before actually taking control over the Khaganate from Anagoy. Even though they were defeated by the Korean troops, this is quite remarkable. On the other side of Eurasia, under Istemi, the Göktürks conquered all of the territory of Central Asia right up to the border of the Hephthalites, the White Huns, by 555. And even then, they allied themselves with the Persians under King Khosrau and squashed the Huns from two sides in 557 or 560 at the Battle of Bukhara. The Turks assumed control over the Sogdian trade cities of Bukhara, but also Samarkand and others. Furthermore, the Tarim Basin to the south was completely subjugated by the Turks, though it seems with little use of violence and thus little resistance. Perhaps because the Ashina themselves, as mentioned earlier, used to reside in or near Gaochang, basically the Turfan region. The peoples of the Tarim certainly were no strangers to them, and they were allowed to continue autonomous rule under Göktürk protection against the Chinese. Speaking of, the Göktürks finished off the rest of Rouran nobility in northern China, subjugated the Kyrgyz near Lake Baikal, also Turkic, and in alliance with the Wei and Zhou dynasties even invaded the territory of the Qi dynasty in northeastern China. Albeit unsuccessful, they thus cemented their rule along the nomadic sedentary border, which now became a Turkic-Chinese border. I mean, the Wei, Zhou, and Qi, all being descended of the Turkic-speaking Tuoba dynasty, thus kinda refute that last sentence, but them having been Sinicized a long time ago should serve as an indicator of said frontier. Lastly, by 580 CE, the Göktürks attacked the Byzantine Empire of the Eastern Romans. Why? Well, unlike in Ottoman times 1000 years later, the Turks at that time were not direct neighbors of the Byzantines. This was not a border skirmish. But they did take notice of the Avars taking refuge in Byzantine territory. As I said, the Avars were most likely a mix of several tribes, but the Ruran nobility arriving at their territory and the Avars suddenly proclaiming a Khaganate just after the Ruran Khaganate in Mongolia had been toppled can be no coincidence. As such, Istemi reminded the Byzantines that the Roman basileos was housing nobles that used to treat us like slaves. But now they are our slaves. They can neither fly away like birds nor hide in the sea like fish. They will not escape our Turkish swords. Certainly, several factors were beneficial in the rapid rise of the Göktürks. Firstly, the Ashina Turks were skilled blacksmith slaves, as Anagoy's insult to Bumin implied. The Ashina not only produced weapons and armory, they most likely also supplied other tribes and, of course, the Ruran with said products. After the Turks retreated from the Wei River in 542, the Chinese Wei dynasty must have gotten interested in establishing trade relations with the Turks, because after Anagoy had refused Bumin's request, the chancellor of the Wei, a certain Yu Wentai, suggested a trade agreement to Bumin, and a marriage with Princess Changle, a daughter of the Wei emperor. After accepting the offer, Bumin mobilized his troops against Anagoy, having the Wei support his cause indirectly. Therefore, the political and economic factor was intertwined with Turco-Chinese relations. On the other hand, the strength of the Turks a few decades later lay in the domination of the Silk Road. With the help of Sogdian merchants, the Göktürk Empire controlled almost all of the relevant trading posts in Eurasia. It was the Sogdian nobility that suggested a common Turkic-Byzantine attack on Persia, which finally took place in 627 CE. And the Sogdians also assisted the Turks in bureaucratic affairs. Therefore, a second factor was the incorporation of the Sogdians into the Göktürk state. The third and most overlooked factor, however, is geography. In Turkey, we have the saying "Coğrafya kaderdir," which means that geography is destiny. So, according to that logic, Turkey's fate would thus be shaped due to its geographic location in between Europe, the Near East, and Asia. But the mountainous Altai region and its flat surroundings to the west and east were also fateful in the rise of the Ashina dynasty. While their own homeland could easily be defended against outside invaders, the flatlands of the Eurasian steppe could easily be stormed over. The Turks had time and resources to build up their army, and the farther they advanced, the more tribes they incorporated, and thus the larger their standing army became. Now imagine a 100,000 men strong army arriving in some peaceful little settlement in Eastern Europe that maybe counts for 1,000 inhabitants.
Hello there.
What do you think would be the most logical decision to be made by the locals? Exactly, they would join the foreigners. Then again, a lot of Turkic peoples were already living in this area between Ukraine and modern-day Kazakhstan, commonly positioned in the Oghur Federation. The Ashina Turks may have seemed a bit foreign to the Oghurs, meaning the Kutsigurs, Utsigurs, Onogurs, Bulgars, and so on, but they basically spoke a language that only in minor feats was different from the local inhabitants' language. Turkic had become a lingua franca across the Eurasian steppe belt already, and it is most likely that these Turkic peoples, like the Ashina, were followers of Tengris. And these three seemingly minor circumstances are why there is not a single report about battles by the Göktürks in their journey to the west, except for the Battle of Bukhara. The further west they went, the stronger resistance became. All this being said, part of the truth is that the Göktürk Empire did not last very long, at least not when compared to other famous empires like those of the Romans, Persians, or British. In fact, in 630 CE, the eastern part was conquered by the newly established Tang dynasty led by the partly Turkophile Taizong. And in 657, the Tang army subjugated the western part of the Khaganate too. Nonetheless, the Göktürks did leave their mark across all of the Eurasian steppe belt. And just a bit later, in 681 CE, a courageous Turk called Kutluk, a late descendant of Bumin, would rise up against Chinese oppression and relentlessly, just like Bumin, gather all the Turkic tribes in the area to finally establish the second Göktürk Khaganate. This empire again lasted for another 70 years. But that's a different story for another video. For example, for a movie documentary that I'm producing right now, and that is to be released on December 17th, right here on YouTube. For this movie, I've gotten some help from a 3D specialist, and together we are reconstructing the Ashina dynasty from scratch, using historical reference material of course. And there's also this book I'm writing on, which is an expanded version of said documentary. You can pre-order it from Amazon already. And if you want to know more about the origins of the Göktürks and cultural aspects, such as their genetics, writing system, and their religion of Tengrism, check out my first book that I published in English, German and French earlier this year. You can purchase all 3 editions on Amazon, iTunes, Google Play and Barnes & Noble. Don't forget to like, subscribe and click on the notification bell so you won't miss any updates. I'm your host Emre and I'll see you around.